Hey y'all, today I'm going to show you how to make better than store-bought white sandwich bread at home. I started baking this bread recipe about a year ago, and since then I've made this bread almost every week since. My family got spoiled with the flavor and texture and asked me to keep making it instead of buying bread. So I've made this video once before, and by far, it's the most popular video on the channel. I decided to make a version 2.0 of where I go into some of the finer points of making this bread at home. To get started, I'll grab my stand mixer, and to that I'll add 3 cups or 448 grams of bread flour, 2 1/4 teaspoons or 9 grams of instant yeast, 2 tablespoons or 28 grams of sugar, and 2 teaspoons or 13 grams of salt. I'm placing the sugar and yeast on one side of the bowl and the salt on the other. Because the salt will kill the yeast, I want to keep them separated until we're ready to mix them. Keep in mind that the dry ingredient measurements can change based on where you live. For example, it is 96% humidity on the day of this filming, which is about normal for where I live. Because the humidity will add excess moisture to the flour sitting in my pantry, a standard cup of flour will weigh more than if you lived in a more arid climate. You can still make good bread using the measurements provided in this recipe, but just keep this in mind when testing and tweaking recipes in your home. I'm going to turn my mixer to low, or if you're using a KitchenAid mixer, turn it to stir. I'm going to slowly add 1 1/4 cups or 300 mils of room temperature water in small increments. What I'm looking for is for all the dry flour to be fully incorporated. As the water gets absorbed into the flour, I can actually hear the mixer motor speed up, which means I need to add a little bit more water. But before I add any more water, I'm going to turn off the mixer and scrape the bowl down with a spatula. This forces all the dry flour still clinging to the side of the bowl down into the bottom. Now that all the dry flour has been picked up, I'm going to increase the mixer speed to medium-low, or 4 on my KitchenAid Artisan mixer. I'm going to let this knead for 8 minutes. What I'm looking for is for the dough hook to grab all the dough and start working it around the bowl. What that's doing is developing the gluten strands, and it's helping pull, stretch, and make them strong. It also incorporates the sugar, salt, and yeast all throughout the dough. What we want is for the dough to clear the sides of the bowl during the knead. If the dough is really beating up the stand mixer, then it's too stiff and you need to add a few more drops of water. After 8 minutes, I'm going to check and see if it's done using the window pane test. What I'm going to do is stretch the dough between my fingers. If I can see light through the dough without it tearing, then the dough passes the test, and you know that the gluten has been properly developed. And it's time for the first proof. The first proof is called bulk fermentation, when the vast majority of the growth will happen. Next, get a glass bowl and coat it with some cooking spray. Pick the dough up and tuck the sides down into a ball. Place the dough top side down into the bowl, and then flip it over seam side down, so that both sides are coated with the oil. Then I'm going to cover it with either plastic wrap or a clean tea towel and let it sit at room temperature for 1.5 hours to 2 hours. Alright, so it's been about 1.5 hours and the dough is ready. It's doubled in size, and so now I'm going to go over shaping. The first thing you want to do is very gently deflate the dough. You don't want to punch it, you don't want to beat it up. Just be very gentle. It has worked hard to make air bubbles. We will be thankful for those air bubbles, but we don't need all of them. Then flip the dough out onto a clean surface. Currently the dough is kind of a circle-y shape, and what we want is a square. So grab and stretch it until it's a square, about 8 inches on all sides. Now I'm going to take the top, like this with my fingers, and I'm going to kind of stretch it outward and then fold it over itself. What we're doing when we stretch it is we're creating tension. This develops a good skin on the dough. We want to roll it tight, and then what I like to do is pinch the seam shut, then flip it over and roll it along the seam to help seal it up. As you can see, the seam has almost disappeared at this point. Now I'm going to take some cooking spray and spray down my loaf pan. I'm using a solid heavy metal bread pan that is 8.5 inches long by 4.5 inches wide. This is a standard bread loaf pan. Place the dough seam side down into the loaf pan and press it into the corners. Next, cover the pan with greased plastic or a tea towel for 1.5 to 2 hours. The dough should rise about 1 inch above the pan. Okay, so it's been about 1.5 hours and I have the oven preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 180 Celsius. Uncover the bread and mist it with a little bit of water to help it develop a nice crust. Bake the bread for 25 to 30 minutes until the internal temperature reaches 110 degrees Fahrenheit or 98 degrees Celsius. Rotate the pan 180 degrees halfway through baking. It's been about 30 minutes, so let's check the internal temperature. I use the Thermopop by ThermoWorks since they're accurate and hold up well over time. Check my Baking Essentials video where I go over some essential baking equipment to include this thermometer. The bread is reading an internal temperature of 209 degrees Fahrenheit, so I'm going to let the bread cool for 10 minutes in the pan before turning it out onto a wire rack. After 10 minutes, the bread is still pretty dang hot, so use pot holders to turn the bread out onto a cooling rack. While the bread is still hot, take some melted butter and brush it all over the crust. This step is optional but gives the crust some tenderness. After brushing it with butter, let the bread cool off for approximately 3 hours, or until it reaches an internal temperature of about 74 degrees Fahrenheit or 23 degrees Celsius. It's been about 3 hours and the bread has reached an internal temperature that we like. But before we cut into it, I spent time forming a tight roll during shaping, which gives us that beautiful swirl. Now cut into the bread and see the soft, fluffy interior. If you found this video helpful, please feel free to give it a like. And as always, if you have any questions about how to make this bread at home, reach out in the comments section below. Thank you so much for your time. See you later.